Hello and welcome back to the Bloomburrow limited set review. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my feelings about the red cards for the upcoming expansion and how good I think they're going to be in limited. If you have not been to one of my set reviews before, I use these tiers, which are a little different from the other way other people evaluate cards. Essentially, tier 1 is good, tier 5 is bad. I like the tiers. That's how it is. If you don't like the tiers, that's okay. If you do like the tiers, I'm going to start assigning tiers to cards right now with Agate Assault. 2 in red for a sorcery. You can choose one, it deals 4 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Or you can exile target artifact. This is a perfectly serviceable removal spell, 3 mana, deal 4. When 3 mana deal 4s are instants, they tend to be tier 2 cards. When they're sorceries, they tend to be tier 3 cards. This card is like a worse version of the card from OTJ that was probably red's best common, the 3 mana spell that you could escalate to deal with artifacts and deal 4 damage at an instant. So like this is considerably worse than that card. But that card was really good, so this card's still going to be playable and I think still serviceable, just not premium or anything. Alania's Pathmaker. 3 in red for a 4-2. When it enters, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. So, it's essentially 4 mana 4-2 draw card, which kind of looks like Organ Hoarder to me, and I love my Organ Hoarder and all that. It's worse than Organ Hoarder because it doesn't put stuff in your graveyard. You don't get the card immediately, and etc. and etc. Well, you actually do get the card immediately. That was not correct. But yeah, I mean, 4 mana 4-2 draw card should be fine, but not special. I think we've seen cards, just typically this should be good but not great. Is kind of how I'm looking at it. It does importantly have 2 points of toughness instead of 1, because that means it can block the tokens that are going to be in the set, so that is something to note as well. Artist's Talent. 1 in a red for a class. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. You can pay 2 in a red to level it up. Non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and then you can pay another 2 in a red to level it up. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or permanent they control, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So there's just a lot of mana to not impact the board in any meaningful way. Paying 2 mana to make it so that your spells turn into looting spells really isn't good. And then when you pay 3 mana to level this up, you have to cast 4 spells before that matters. So that kind of by itself just makes me not excited about it, because it's just going to take you so long to get the mana that you spent back on this card, and it doesn't impact the board. So obviously the level 3 ability is okay, but even then there's not that many ways to do those things. So it's I don't think it's amazing. Blacksmith's Talent. Single red mana for a class. When it enters, create a colorless equipment with equipped creature gets +1/+1 and equipped for 2. Then you can pay 3 at the beginning of your combat on your turn. Attach target equipment you control to up to 1 target creature you control. And you can pay 3 in a red during your turn. Equipped creatures you control have double strike and haste. So if you think about this, 1 mana make an equipment. The equipment is like a worse short sword. Okay, so it's one of those cards. It's possible that I'm falling into the trap here, and this is not actually that good. The thing is, what appeals to me is you can use your mana on turn 1, and then you can make it so that, like, instead of equipping for 2, you just pay 3, which means that once you've equipped a second creature, you got, mana value out of it. And there is other equipment in this set, not a ton, but there is some equipment around. There's really not that much. That actually makes me want to bump this down a little bit. The more I read this, I think actually I'm going to bump this down just a little bit. The reason to bump this down primarily is that it is kind of just a short sword, which isn't very good. So like 1 mana make an equipment that, you know what I mean, like a short sword is not really good. It's an okay card, but it's not great. And this card is better than just short sword because, again, in the late game or mid to late game, you can be like, okay, I'm gonna, over the course of 2 turns, pay 7 mana and make it so that every single creature I have that I play from now on is an extreme threat. Double strike +1/+1 and haste is like a really strong thing to do. I'm just a little bit worried are you going to have time to spend that much mana on like very minimal board impact up front, right? You get the board impact, right? You get like a double striker, but it's so like a normal play pattern, play this on one, play your 2-drop, on turn 3 level it up, equip this, probably get to attack with your 2-drop. That's okay. And then on turn 4 you could level it up again, or you could like play your 4-drop, and then on turn 5 level it up, and then swing with your. So it's like it does kind of have a little bit of awkwardness there, where you're like, well, I really want to invest into this thing, but there are ways to deal with enchantments, and it's like you can find yourself in a spot where you overinvest in this card. Blooming Blast. 1 in a red for an instant, gift a treasure. You can deal 2 damage to target creature. If the gift was promised, it also deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. So I think you're going to see this in like standard, maybe, in like mono red or something, because 2 damage to a creature, 3 damage to your opponent's face is pretty good. But in limited, giving your opponent a treasure to deal 3 damage to them is not the best unless it's ending the game. It's kind of like the way you're evaluating this card is it's a 2-mana deal 2, which would be a tier 4 card, but I'm bumping it up a tier because in some game states you hit your opponent for 3 and you're just taking over. Like you're just so far ahead at that point that you can afford to give them a treasure and you're gonna just win the game because you have dealt so much damage to them. And so I think that is worth an additional tier. I just think that in an early game state, this is not going to do necessarily what you want every time. Brambleguard Captain. 3 in red for a 2/3. At the beginning of combat at our turn, target creature you control gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is this creature's power. Yeah, I mean, this is strong, right? So it does all the Valiant triggers, and it has an immediate enter the battlefield ability. It means that if you have, literally any creature, basically, even a 1/1 token, when you play this on turn 4, you get to attack for 3. Like, that's very strong. It doesn't block super well. That's fine. You don't really this is not a card that really wants you to block. It essentially has haste, right? Like it's a 4 mana 2/3 with haste, except the haste is actually a little bit better than haste in most spots. It can pump itself. There are other ways to pump it in the format. It scales with this thing's power. I don't know. I just really like this card. It seems really strong to me. It is a card that I'm monitoring because I'm like, it is a 4-drop that is a 2/3. Like that is something to monitor in terms of like, could not be as great as it looks, right? Like the face value of this card is like, oh, it looks really good. I am worried about some scenarios where you just play this, but like even if you play this attack for 4 or whatever, and then your opponent just kills this, you still got to push the 4 damage, right? And you got to make them take their turn off or spend their mana maybe slightly inefficiently to deal with this. So I do think that it is going to be a good card. I'm obviously not putting it in tier 1. There's something holding me back from that, and part of it is just the rate up front. 4 mana 2/3 very bad. Partial haste good. If there's ways to buff this card's power, it just kind of like takes it. Like it makes your creature a threat every single turn, which is a strong thing to be doing. Brazen Collector. 1 red for a 2/1 first strike. When it attacks, you add red mana. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So to me, this just looks like a really strong 2-drop. 2 mana 2/1 first strike. It's not good, but it does often have an attack on turn 3. On the draw, this card's worse, but like you can also find yourself in your opponent as the opponent of this. Do you really want to block this on turn 3? Because like red, there are combat tricks, and like, do you really want to find yourself blocking the the 2 mana 2/1 first strike? There's the 1 mana thing that cantrips and red's a combat trick. It's kind of interesting with this because like it's free and your opponent so like you can definitely find yourself not wanting to block this, and then you're getting a mana dork that also gets to attack on the same turn. Is very solid, right? That's the thing you want to do. The problem with this card, obviously, is that if the Raccoon deck is good, which it probably isn't, but if it were good, it would want this card. But I think this is just a card you'd play in any red deck, so that's where you start running into issues. Byway Bartero. 2 and a red for a 3/3 menace. When you expend 4, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. So, this is a really sweet card in the sense that it is card advantage in the late game. So you're typically going to want to do with this card to maximize it is you go like 2-drop this, 2-2-drops, and then you expend 4 and you can discard your hand and then draw 2 cards right after that. That's the way to go about it. But a 3-mana 3/3 Menace is an okay card by itself. It's not busted or anything, but I think that would be like a playable card. And this is enough, I think, extra value that is going to be a pain to deal with, right? Like it's something that is going to eat removal from your opponent pretty often because it's an ability that is threatening, not necessarily immediately, but over the course of a game. If you activate this once and it's profitable for you, you're very far ahead. It's a May, so that's nice. It's only expend 4, so that's nice. Yeah, I mean, there's just ways to trigger this. It kind of fuels itself and just can be a value engine that seems really strong to me. Conduct electricity. 4 and a red for an instant. It deals 6 damage to target creature and 2 damage to up to 1 creature token. So we just kind of had this in Trick Shot in what's it called? OTJ. I think that was a sorcery actually. I don't remember. Either way, it didn't see much play, but I think that was like a tier 4 card. There's going to be more tokens in this set than OTJ, I think, although I thought there was going to be a lot of tokens in OTJ. I kind of got that one wrong. I do think there will be more in this set because of the Offspring mechanic, but I don't know. It's probably going to be about the same. So I do think this is better because there's actually the word removal in this set is like worse than OTJ by a little bit, but it's like a hit touch worse. So this card relative to the other removal will be better than it was in OTJ. So yeah, let me actually just go check if that was a sorcery or not. Hold on. Okay, I just checked. Trick Shot was indeed an instant, so I actually want to move this down a little bit. Because I thought Trick Shot... I do think this will be better than Trick Shot was, but not by much. Trick Shot was like a tier 4 card. I'm going to move this down to tier 4 then. I thought Trick Shot was a sorcery for some reason. Yeah, so just a pure reprint of Trick Shot, which is fine. And I think this is it's kind of on the border between tier 3 and 4, but I'm probably never going to play it, so Coruscation Mage. 1 and a red for a 2/2 with Offspring for 2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. So obviously this is kind of like a nice blue-red spells payoff. You don't really want to play this in a deck that's not really deep on spells. Obviously, it's an uncommon, so you can't necessarily rely on having it for every deck. But it is going to be kind of annoying to deal with, right? Your opponent on turn 4 takes the turn off, right? Because you're making a 2/2 and a 1/1 on turn 4 is not really doing enough. So you're taking that turn off to be really threatening in the late game, and I think that you can kind of get there with this in a lot of spots. Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest. 3 red for a 5/5 flying. When it enters or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater, so at least 1, because this exists. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, it deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So, 5 mana 5/5, like the worst case scenario is 5 mana 5/5 flying, deal 2 damage to your opponent. Okay, I mean that's not bad, but that's not great either. This kind of reminds me of Bonehorde Dracosaur. It's not quite as good as Bonehorde Dracosaur because Bonehorde Dracosaur just did the thing on upkeep and made like a bunch of other creatures and stuff. But this technically does more on ETB than Bonehorde Dracosaur did when it enters, and they just kill it because you hit them for 2. And that's the worst case scenario. So sometimes you'll just have like sometimes you'll have a 4-power creature, and you'll hit your opponent for 4, pretty good. At the end of your turn, like this is just going to be really threatening, and has flying and is big, and it is one of those cards that's like, could it not be tier 1? Yeah, it could not be tier 1, but it's a strong card, and I'm happy to just put it here. Emberheart Challenger. 1 and red for a 2/2 haste prowess with Valiant. Whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. I don't know. So 2 mana 2. There's a reason they don't do 2 mana 2/2 haste prowess very often, and the reason is that it is good. Like a 2 mana 2/2 haster is already a tier 2 card. 2 mana 2/2 haste prowess is probably close to like a tier 2 card by itself, and then this extra ability I think does bump it up over the top. I just think that there's enough ways to be targeting this thing that are free or low cost that you're actually going to just be able to draw cards a lot, and doesn't even have to attack, right? Like you can just target this once. It draws you a card. You may not get to attack. That's okay. It got damage in on turn 2. This just seems really strong to me. This is a really strong 2-drop. Maybe tier 1 is too high, but I think it is capable of being that strong. Festival of Embers. 4 and a red for an enchantment. During your turn, you may cast instant or sorcery spells from your graveyard by paying 1 life in addition to their other costs. If a card or token will be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead, and you can pay 1 and a red to sacrifice this. Yeah, I mean, having to pay 1 life in addition to the other costs of casting your spells is not great, but it's not so bad that, like, you can't do it. The part that is so bad that you can't do it is, like, paying 5 mana for this, and then having to, like, it's 5 mana, don't impact the board. And then you're hoping that you get to impact the board next turn. Like, it's like a draw spell, right? It's like, oh, I'm drawing 3 cards. Like, if this was just like, they print 5 mana, draw 3s, this is, like, worse than a 5 mana draw 3. A 5 mana draw 3 at sorcery speed would be, like, a tier 4, tier 5 card. I think this is worse than that, so I'm putting it in tier 5. Also, you have to have cast, like, you can't do this and then, like, cast, you know what I mean? Like, you can't, like, cast spells after this and then do the thing. So, like, you only have the spells that are already in your graveyard, and that part of it, I think, is really the end of this card being competitively possible. Flame Cache Gecko. 1 on red for a 2/2, and it enters if an opponent lost life this turn, add Rakdos mana. And you can pay 1 on a red to discard a card and draw a card. Yeah, I mean, I like this card. The cards that require your opponent to lose life to do something when they enter the battlefield historically have not done very well, because that's a thing that you can't reliably do every single game. I know that there are ways to do that in this set. There are ways to get around your opponent playing a 2-drop, but still, like, this isn't a 2-drop you really want to play on 2. It's free, quote unquote. And this one actually is free because you can use the mana to loot here, or rummage, that is. So you do actually have a use for the extra mana if you want it. Like, if you on turn 3 attack, like, anytime you deal damage to your opponent, you're just gonna play this card, right? Like, no matter what, you're just going to play this card pretty much, because it's 0 mana, and then you can just spend the 2 mana if you want to, get this back. One of the awkward parts about this card is that it's off curve. Like, one of the reasons it's not rated higher is that you want to play your 2-drops on turn 2. You don't really want to play this 2-drop on turn 2. There will be some situations where you have a 1-drop in play, and then you will get to do that. But I think the majority of games, that's not going to be the case. Frilled Spark Shooter. 3 and a red for a 3/3 menace reach. It enters the +1/+1 counter on it if opponent lost life this turn. So, if they printed a 4 mana 4/4 menace reach, that would be a pretty good card. They've done, like, menace reach before, and it actually plays pretty well because it's good on defense and it's good on offense. And I should probably put this a little bit lower because it's like, and I originally had it lower, and I think I will move it back down, where it's like, but there are ways to make your opponent lose life, and if you do that on turn 3, which is probably one of the easier turns to make that happen or facilitate that, I think you'll play this. So I think that makes me want to move it down, so I'll move it back down. Yeah, this is where I originally had it, and then I moved it up because I got excited about the deal damage thing, and then and now I'm moving it back down because I'm like, man, a 4 mana 3/3 menace reach just isn't it. So I do think that in some decks you'll play this and it'll be fine, but I don't think it's ever going to be anything more than fine, so I'm just going to put it here. Harnesser of Storms. 2 and a red for a 1/4. When you cast a non-creature spell or otter spell, you may exile the top card of your library. Until the end of turn, you may play that card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So, the problem with this card is that it only sticks around to this turn. And so, you have to, like, it's weird, because you have to cast a spell, which means that you're spending a considerable amount of mana to be able to hit the top card of your deck. Now, it's likely you'll be able to play that card, but it's not entirely likely. It only triggers once each turn. I don't know. It's a 3 mana 1/4. I'm really skeptical of it. It does, like, kind of look like a card that's like, it could go off if you untap with it. Yeah, you know what? I should move it up a tier. I'm gonna move this one up a tier. I think this is good enough. It can go off in some scenarios, like where you're just trying to, um, like you. It is like 4 is a lot of toughness in this set. There aren't as many things that deal 4. It's a little bit bigger. It does block tokens well. I kind of think that the card has potential, and for that reason, I'm evaluating high. One of the big problems with it is a creature deck. Now it's an otter, so otters are like a thing that do matter in like the blue red deck. It's like a blue red spells and like a light otter sub theme deck. So like it being an otter is good, but it is kind of like it does have the problem of being a non-creature spell in your deck that wants to have as many spells as possible, or as many like consistent sorceries as possible. Heartfire Hero, single red mana for a 1/1. When it becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. Yeah, this looks really strong to me. It's a 1-drop that scales with the game. Um, again, if it grows one time, you're going to be pretty happy, right? It turns into a 2/2, deals your opponent 2 when it dies. That's a good card. Um, and I think it's going to do that pretty much every single game. Like, I can't really see a game when you're playing red where you can't find a way to target this with something over the course of the game. Yeah, maybe you can't do it on turn 2, so maybe it only gets to attack once. Okay, fine. There are a lot of X1s in the format, so it can attack through those, all that stuff. This just seems like a really real problem to deal with for your opponent, and it's just going to grow, I think, a lot, and seems like a really strong card to me. Hearthborn Battler. 2 and a red for a 2/3 with haste. When a player casts their second spell each turn, this deals 2 damage to target opponent. So, this card, 3 mana 2/3 haste would be like a tier 4 card ish, somewhere in that range. 3 mana 3/3 haste used to be like a tier 2 card. Now it's probably a little like the third point of power is really relevant. It's I guess if your opponent plays a 2/2 on average as a tie, yeah, maybe it's closer to tier 3, and then I mean you can set up turns where you're double spelling and hitting your opponent for 2, and that's really powerful. And you're not giving up too much on the front. You're giving up basically 1 point of power on the front to be able to have that ability and to prevent your opponent from double spelling. Like basically this card says your opponent, if they were playing on double spelling, is now going to take 2 damage. Unless one of their first spells kills this, and then that's like a whole other thing, so that is something. But I do think that, on turn 4, there's enough 1 mana spells that you could be like, okay, this into buff its power or whatever, hit your opponent for 2, attack for 3 or something, and then you're getting in there. So I actually do think that this will be pretty good, but not anything like amazing, not anything busted. Hired Claw. 1 red mana for a 1/2. Whenever you attack with 1 or more lizards, including this, Hired Claw deals 1 damage to target opponent. You can pay 1 red, put a +1/+1 counter on it, only if an opponent lost life this turn and only once this turn. So, if you play this on turn 1, you get to attack. It's going to hit your opponent for 1. Before blocks, you can threaten to put a counter on this, and then their opponent can't block, so you're taking another damage. And you can still just, if you don't have a 2-drop, you just put the counters on this, you're off to the races. You have a 1 mana 2/3 in play that gave you something to do on turn 2. That's unbelievable. And then later in the game, you can play this, and you can just grow it. You know what I mean? You can just keep growing it to the point where it becomes an actual relevant threat later on, which is really, really good for a 1-drop. And this just seems really, really strong to me. Primarily because it works with itself. The lizard stuff I don't love for the most part, but I think this working with itself means that it's just going to go in every red deck and be really good in every red deck. Hoarder's Overflow. 1 and a red for an enchantment. It enters the battlefield, and whenever you expand 4, put a stash counter on it. And then you can pay 1 and a red to sacrifice it to discard your hand and draw cards equal to the number of stash counters on it. So this is just too slow. We saw Connect the Dots in Murders of Carlo Manor. There are some people who think that card was playable in some decks. I am not one of them. I don't believe that card was playable in any deck. This card is worse than that card because expending 4 is a lot slower than attacking with creatures, and you can't trigger it more than once a turn. So it's just really, really slow. This has to draw you like 4 cards for it to be good. And that means you have to wait 4 turns and spend 4 mana on each of those turns to do the thing, which just seems really, really slow to me. Kindle Spark Duo. 2 in a red for a 1/3. You can tap it to deal 1 damage to target opponent, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, untap it. So this is, obviously, you know, your, what's it called? Thermo Alchemist. Thermo Alchemist, notably, a lot, like, 2 mana is a lot less than 3. So Thermo Alchemist is a tier 2 card. This is a common. So that is one thing that's interesting about this. The problem is, like, we saw this with the Catapult in Wilds of Eldraine, which you could play, by the way. I did play it multiple times. It wasn't ever good. Like, I won games having it in my deck. That doesn't mean the card was good. It just means that the deck was good. This actually, I think, is worse than Catapult because it's the 4th toughness. I think it matters more than the 1st power in general. Obviously, it blocks tokens a little bit better, so there's that. But it makes it easier to kill, which I think is probably a trade-off you don't really want to be making with this type of card. And Catapult wasn't very good, so I think that the extra 1 mana is not worth the cost of this being a 1/3. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like the curve of Thermo Alchemist on 2 into spells is much better than this on 3 into spells on 4. Like, it's just, you're just a whole turn slower, you know, and that I think is actually really impactful for the spells deck. I still think this card may be playable in that deck. I just don't think, obviously it's not playable anywhere else, and I don't know how good it's even going to be there. Manifold Mouse. 1 red for a 1/2 with Offspring for 2. At the beginning of your turn, combat of your turn, target mouse you control gains double strike or trample until end of turn. So there's a lot of mice in specifically red and white. But the fact that this works with itself, right, like you Offspring on 4, make 2 mice, give something double strike that turn, and then you probably will be able to find a way to have a mouse. Does work with itself, works with all the tricks. I don't know, just seems like a flexible card that could be strong. I don't think it's busted, but I think it seems like a solid that's kind of my thoughts on this card. It's, you know, seems somewhat flexible, doesn't seem super overtly, like, straight in your face powerful, but yeah, looks like it can do enough to be decent. Might of the Meek. Target creature gains trample until end of turn. It gets +1/+0 until end of turn if you control a mouse. Not if it's a mouse, but if you control a mouse, and you draw a card. I like this, actually. So this type of effect usually is a little too small ball, but with all the Valiant stuff going on, and I think there's just enough things in red that want this, that I think you're actually going to be pretty happy to play it. It does work. It's really good in the spells deck. Obviously, the spells deck doesn't have mice, so there's kind of that problem. I think it's better in red-white. I don't know. It seems good to me. It doesn't seem great. Like, you can't just play 15 of these or whatever and call it a deck, because it is just it's a 1-mana cantrip. But it does. I think this is going to have a place in the format, more so than these tricks usually do. Just because of the Valiant and there's kind of spelly stuff going on. So I like it. Playful Shove. 1 in a red for a sorcery. It deals 1 damage to any target, and you draw a card. So this card looks sick. Looks really good. A lot of X1s. I actually think that I might be too low on this right now, because Flick a Coin was nuts. Now, I think this is actually worse than Flick a Coin. Do I think that? Yes, I do, because this is a sorcery. So that's why I have it in tier 3, is it's a sorcery. But I still think, despite being a sorcery, I think this is decent. And I think you will play it. Again, I do think there's a lot of X1s in the set, and it's going to hit enough things, and in like the spells deck it's good, and it's just kind of, I feel like there's a reason that this is uncommon, you know what I mean? Like, there's a reason this is an uncommon, and I assume that, like, I am kind of taking, again, we're doing a little bit of a respect the rarity. We gotta respect Wizards of the Coast a little bit. It's at times and be like, they did make it uncommon. So I do think it's going to be decent, but I'm having reservations about moving it higher than this. Quake Tusk Boar. 3 red for a 5/5 reach trample haste. It's kind of all you could ask for. Reach, trample, haste. 3 good keywords. Getting the beats rolling. You're never gonna really cut this, I don't think. But as a 5-drop, are you really gonna be pursuing it that much? Probably not. It's gonna be a good card in pretty much every red deck. There are going to be people that are going to hate on this card and tell you that it is worse than it is because it quote-unquote doesn't have synergy. Those people are interesting, in my opinion, but there will be a lot of hate towards this card. It will perform well statistically, people will hate on it. It will be just good. I don't know. I think it will be somewhere in the middle is sort of how I'm going to feel about Quake Duskboar. I think I'm going to be, that's how I expect to feel about Quake Duskboar. Rabid Gnaw. When on red for instant, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it's funny that this card got printed for several reasons. So they've made green bite spells for, I don't know, 5 years now that are just 2 mana instant bite, and those cards actually have been like some of green's best commons for a while. And then the first time they ever do this in red, they may have done this in red before, I don't actually know, but the first time in a while they've done this in red, they just are like, nah, actually, we're going to give you +1/+0. It's like, okay. I'm sure part of the reason for that is that red creatures are often smaller than green creatures, so like to make the card, but like, I don't know, it does kind of look funny, do you know what I mean? But yeah, it's good, it's a good card. I think it's clearly a good card. And it will work really well in the Valiant deck, so I like it a lot. Raccoon Rallier. 1 on red for 2/2. You can tap it to give target creature haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. Better than this effect usually is. Usually I would put this in tier 4. Again, Valiant sort of pumps it up a little bit. Again, I don't think Valiant is such a huge part of the format that this is going to make it like premium or anything. But it's a card that's already borderline playable, and I think it's enough to bump it up to be like a standard common instead of a like card that you're unhappy to put in your deck. And it being a 2/2, sometimes they're 1/3s. This is better as a 2/2 usually. So, yeah. Reptilian Recruiter. 3 red for a 4/2 trample. When it enters, choose target creature. If that creature's power is 2 or less, or if you control another lizard. Gain control of that creature until end of turn, untap it, and gains haste until end of turn. So these creatures with active treason effects on them, just like stapled onto them, are generally very good. We've seen this with Krishnak and other things, especially when it's free and you don't have to like sacrifice anything. This type of card tends to be very good. Now the reason I haven't put it in tier 1 is there's a couple of reasons. One of them is that this is 5 mana. So it does kind of like need to be doing something really strong, which I think it is. I could totally see this being tier 1 at the end of the format. I could even see this being tier 1 like week 1 and just being like, yeah, it's busted, fine, whatever. Like, yeah, the problem of having 2 toughness and, lizards, like, do you actually need lizards? Well, that question will be answered pretty early, of like whether or not you care about having lizards. I would sort of side on the side of, no, you don't really care that much if you have a lizard. You would like to have a lizard, but just gaining control of anything and getting to attack with it for free is, like, kind of nice. So, there's that. Yeah, and I think there are enough lizards running around that you may or may not be able to have them. Roughshod Duo. 2 red for a 3/2 with trample. When you expend 4, target creature you control gets +1/+1. And it gains trample until end of turn. No thanks. So this attacks in most games as a 4/3 trample on turn 4. Doesn't really excite me. Expend 4 is not a mechanic I'm super high on. You kind of want to be skipping turn 3 in your expend 4 decks, so don't really want to play this. So I don't know. Maybe tier 4 is even too generous. Maybe I should put it in tier 5. I'm putting it in tier 4 just because, like, it's a creature that has stats and, like, can do stuff. So that's it on this card. Sazakap's Brew. 1 and a red for an instant. You gift a tapped fish. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. Target player draws 2 cards. If the gift was promised, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So this is, what's it called? The thing. Whatever. Is it? I don't remember. What, Impulse? I don't know. It's not Impulse. It's the, Reckless, is it Reckless Impulse? I don't know. The thing, you know what I'm talking about. the 2-mana discard 1, draw 2. It's a classic. It's a classic archetype of card in red. This one's very interesting because you can use it as a combat trick, but the cost of doing so is very high. Like, giving your opponent a fish is very bad when you're trying to kill them, and like it doesn't allow you to go up on cards really, because you can make your creature trade up or hit your opponent for 2 extra damage, but you can't ever like have your thing survive something it wasn't going to survive, which I think makes me like this less. I do think it's tier 3 because, again, the whatever type of card is usually tier 4 and like playable in some decks. This card I think is a little bit better than that because it has the extra mode, but I think the extra mode is probably worse than not. Like, it can cause people to behave poorly with it, so I think it may not perform well just because people are going to do this too much when you shouldn't. Like, you don't really ever want to be just like, okay, pump my thing and you get a fish. You know, generally you're not going to want to do that. So, but people will do it, so I think that's going to maybe make it perform not the best. Season of the Bold. 3 red for a sorcery with the paw print mechanic. You can pay 1 paw print to tap and create a tap treasure token, 2 paw prints to exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until end of the next turn, you may play them. That's a lot of cards. And 3 paw prints until end of your next turn. Whenever you cast a spell, this deals 2 damage up to 1 target creature. I should move this up a little bit. If you think about it as 5 mana, exile the top 4 cards, you can cast them until the end of your next turn. That's not even like that good though, right? Like 5 mana, draw 4, and make a treasure. What about 5 mana, draw 2, and then maybe you get to deal 2 damage? I don't know, that doesn't excite me either. I think I should move it up a little bit though. I think tier 4 is probably a little harsh. I think you could find yourself justifying a tier 4 rating though, because you could say things like, this is going to be overdrafted, so that if it's in your deck, it's going to lose more because it's, you know what I mean? Because it's mythic, so people are going to take it very highly. I don't think it's worthy of being taken pack 1, pick 1, so generally any mythic that like I rate in tier 3 is like maybe even generous, just because like people are going to overdraft it. So if it were drafted properly, it might win a little bit more because the deck might be, you know what I mean? It's like it has the selection bias effect of like bad players take it higher, so it is played by worse players, like that kind of thing. It kind of cascades in that way. But yeah, it's going to be okay, but I don't think special. Steam Path Charger. 1 red for a 2/1 with Offspring for 2. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to target player. These type of creatures are just never good. Giving this Offspring for 2 doesn't really make it any better. Like a 4 mana for a 2/1 and a 1/1 that when they die, deal 1 damage to target player. I'm not excited about that. I think there's way better things to do. Lizard Warlock, it means it only works in the Lizard deck. I don't even think you want it there. Kind of makes me think the Lizard deck isn't going to function, because this is sort of like it's common that it's getting in red, and it's like, I don't know. So, yeah, not my favorite. Storm Splitter. 3 in a red for a 1/4 with haste. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a token that's a copy of this, exile a token at the beginning of the next end step. So, obviously, if you cast like 3 instant sorceries, you get like 7 1/4s total, because you know, it has, each of these has the ability. So trust me, I didn't miss that. I still don't think it's very good, because it's a 4 mana 1/4, which is very bad. It doesn't like have prowess or like make it easier for it to attack through many things. So if your opponent has like a 2/2, they can just block one. Like, you know what I mean? It just doesn't. You gotta make a lot of these to get around, which means you need to cast like 4 or 5 instants and sorceries. If you cast 4, you get, I think, like 12 of these or something. But your opponent can just kill it. You know what I mean? Like it's a 1/4 for 4. It's not like it's really threatening. Like it is threatening in some ways, but it's not threatening to block anything ever. And realistically, you probably aren't going to cast more than 3 instant and sorcery spells in a turn, and once you do that once, you're probably not going to be able to do it again for a couple of turns. So it's like, I don't know. I just think this is not... And this is just too much work, I think, to get it to actually be good. Sunspire Links. 2 red for a 5/4 players can't gain life, damage can't be prevented. When it enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls, which is maybe one max for in this set. There's not that many non-basics. There are some, but not a ton. Maybe there could be a game where there could be like 2, but on average, it's probably going to deal 0 or 1 damage. When it enters, it's a 4-mana 5/4 vanilla. Players can't gain life. It hates on the black-white decks. Cool. I don't know. Is that a deck that I'm super worried about? Maybe not. I mean, it's a big creature. It does just kind of like die, and like sometimes you're on defense, and then you want to be able to gain life, and then this doesn't help you. So, yeah, I think this is good, but not tier 1, not quite tier 1 material. Take out the trash. When a red for instant, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. If you control a raccoon, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. So these conditional card selection effects on these red deal 3s have historically made them really, really good. This is probably one of the worst ones, because having to have a raccoon is not a thing that is like the easiest thing to do. But you can, I mean, there's raccoons, like you can have them. It's just like, you know, is red-green going to be a good deck? History says probably no. At least, well, I mean, what about recent history? Well, recent history says maybe. Recent history different than, you know, than older history. So like, maybe it has a chance, but I don't know. We'll see. Remains to be seen on how good raccoons is going to be. But I think this is just going to be, the problem is this is just going to go in every deck. So like, you know, all that. 3 in red for a 3/4 menace. Teapot Slinger. When you expend 4, this deals 2 damage to each opponent. So the problem with this is that, first of all, it's a 4-mana 3/4 menace, which is okay, but generally those type of stat lines tend to be not very good and generally underperform people's expectations for them. And this one requires you to spend an additional, like, it's 4 mana, and then it wants you to spend more mana, like 4 more mana next turn and the next turn. Like, you just want to do that every turn, and you have to do it twice before this is actually good. So that scares me. That's kind of all the recipe for like not very good. That's how you get like not very good card. Obviously, in some games it can go off, but the times where that's not going to happen is, I think, the majority of the time. Valley Flamecaller. 2 in a red for a 3/3. If a lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1, and it's a 3/3. So yeah, base stats by itself, very good. It works with itself, so that's good. It attacks as a 4/3, sure. That's good. I think that obviously this enables, maybe I should just bump this up to tier 1. I probably should. The thing is, the reason I don't have it in tier 1 is like, it doesn't just do the thing by itself. I mean, it does, but by itself it's basically a 4-mana 3/4, or 3-mana 3/4, which is fine. Like, it's a good 4/3, sorry. Which is a good card, or at least a decent card. But, and I'm giving it a bump for, a little bit of a bump for that ability. It's just, like Torbrand, very good card. I don't know, man. There are some game states where it's going to be absolutely dominant, and in some game states it's just going to kind of be its own thing. And it's not going to be good, but I don't think it's going to be busted. So I'm going to leave it in tier 2 for now. Valley Rallier, or Valley Rally. Nope, just whatever. 2 in a red for an instant. Gift of food. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. If the gift was promised, target creature you control gains first strike until end of turn. I mean, this is really weird because usually these effects, like recently these effects have been like, just get this effect and then maybe draw a card, so under some condition. This one, you're like gifting a food to give something first strike. That seems horrendous. To me, anyways. Now the set characteristics are such that going wide might be feasible. It does work in a way where, you know, Valiant triggers, but I don't, this is not a way you want to trigger Valiant. You're giving your opponent a food in your deck that's trying to like beat down. It just doesn't seem like what you want to do, but maybe it is. Maybe it's something that you're okay. Maybe it just gets there, but I think it's probably not very good. War Squeak. Single red mana for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, an opponent controls can't block this turn. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. So this is like Cartouche of Zeal or whatever it's called. from whatever. We also saw it at Hammer Hand or whatever. This I think is going to be better than those because it's in a set where you care about targeting your creatures with stuff, and this gives haste as well, which is a nice upgrade. And yeah, I think I kind of like this. I kind of like this enchantment. It seems like it's going to play well in a decent variety of the decks. Not in like red-green or anything, but I think in, it is a non-creature as well. Whisker Quill Scribe. 1 and a red for a 2/2 with a Valiant. When it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you may discard a card if you do draw a card. So it's a Rummager for 2. These tend to be pretty fine. This is a mouse, so that's something. It's a fine 2-drop, but nothing special or exciting. The rummaging effect is something that is nice, but not busted or anything. And the last red card, Wildfire Howl. 1 red for a sorcery. You can gift a card. It deals 2 damage to each creature. If the gift was promised, instead it deals 1 damage to any target and 2 damage to each creature. This may be the worst trade deal in the history of deals. Like, my lord. Giving a whole card to deal 1 damage. You're just getting 1 damage. You're getting 1 single damage. And you're gifting an entire card for that. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem great to me. The base rate of just 3 mana, Pyroclasm is, I think, is bad, but I think is kind of acceptable. I could just put this in tier 5, to be honest, and I should. I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna be a hater. I'm just gonna put it in tier 5. I'm never gonna play this card. It's double pipped too. It's just because you're the aggressive deck. Like, if it said deal 2 damage to each creature and opponent, I'd be like, ooh. I'm thinking, because now I'm like, oh, could it do something? But now it's like, yeah, I don't know. This just seems like so low. Like, what happened with this card? It feels to me like this is the type of card where they designed it and it was really good, and then they had to just nerf it into the ground. So whatever this card used to look like must have been great, because what it currently looks like is, I don't know how you don't start here. You know what I mean? This isn't, when you're designing Magic the Gathering cards, you don't start with double pipped deal Pyroclasm for 3 mana. That's not where you start. So I imagine it must have been 1 in a red or something. I feel like it probably was 1 in a red, or maybe red, and maybe it was too good. I doubt it would have been too good. It probably would have been fine. I don't know. But that's the red set review. Thank you for sticking around. If you enjoyed it or found some enlightenment in it, click that subscribe button. But actually, just you can also go watch the other ones if you liked them. There's more. There's more to come. I still have to do my Sunset, or my nope. That's another brand. We have to call it the set re-review. That's what we call it. Still got to do that for MH3. So that too coming out soon. See you.